Salam alaikum. So, first of all, I want to thank all of my subscribers who have stayed with me during this process of my awakening and helping others reach an awakening within themselves. I know that within Islam, as the kind of the youngest religion, in the sense that it's always been here and it's always been around in the idea of the idea of unity and oneness of God, but it is new in the sense of the organization. So it tends to be a little bit more dogmatic in terms of following its doctrine and not allowing some of the other ideas of quantum physics and science to come in. Now, there are a lot of people that are Muslims and they are scientists, and they also know and kind of use the Quran as almost like a scientific basis or a foundation. Now, the Quran is not a science book at all, but within the Quran, you can see how science, or at least the study of quantum physics, can start to take place in one's mind. So, I want to start at the very basic, fundamental idea of how God is consciousness, and therefore we are all part of this consciousness, this larger consciousness that I call collective consciousness. And it has had many names, and one of the names in Arabic is Allah, because that is what is used to describe one creator, and that is what we are all connected to. So let's begin at the very beginning. As you can see here in this first image, we have particles of matter. We need to look at what is everything that we look at and observe actually made of. We know matter can be broken down only so far, dividing it into smaller and smaller parts. You end up with an atom. An atom is the smallest possible particle of a substance, but now we are actually starting to understand that there's quarks and there's other little tinier substances as well that are holding matter together. But here we see that we have the word atom, which actually means it cannot be divided. And I said this before in my other video when I was interpreting some of the verses that use the name Adam. Where did the word Adam come from? Where did the writers of Genesis and then later on the Quran, where did they actually get that word from? That word is a collective consciousness word in the understanding of what is the building blocks of matter. So Adam had to be the very first building block of matter in the terms of a human body, a human experience with this consciousness. It says atoms and molecules are very small, so small that you cannot see them unless you use a special microscope. These are very fundamental ideas. What is matter made of? So Empedocles was a Greek philosopher and scientist. He said that matter is actually made of fire, air, water, and earth. This is where you understand the idea of the five-pointed star that a lot of Wiccans and witches use. This is their knowledge of understanding about elements. So we have a lot of this type of spirituality or ideology that's infused into some of our major religions today, in the sense that they understand that things are made of elements. And sometimes that symbol of the five-pointed star is very scary to people. And the inverted five-pointed star is supposed to symbolize Satan, and the up five-pointed star is supposed to symbolize Wicca or witchcraft. And witches were known to actually use the elements and the knowledge of elements in order to create healing ointments and healing things for each other, and to, dabble in magic in the sense of either white magic. And then the Satanists, the one that's the inverted star, long time ago, that was to refer to those that dabbled in the black arts, in the dark arts that would actually take energy away or to impede on others' free will. So you have two kinds of magic here, but they both really work with the elements. And it's interesting that the Quran writes that Iblis was made of fire, just fire. So imagine how imbalanced that energy had to be. If it didn't have air, it didn't have water, and it didn't have earth. And humans were actually supposed to be then created with all of these elements. And this is what the Wiccans know, or Wiccans know, and this is what witches really hold on to as wisdom. So there you have this idea of where the elements start to mean and come from in a spiritual sense. And this is where Iblis was known as a fire being. So let's go back into the idea of what is matter then made up of in order to give its properties and compositions that we're able to observe in our reality. So if you see here, this is actually from a 5th grade textbook. Matter is anything that takes up space and displays the properties of mass and inertia. So we have two parts of matter. You have the composition, which is the elements and the components that actually make the building blocks of that matter. And then you have the properties. So if you take an example of a banana, have the property of the banana, which is the color, which is yellow greenish, texture is squishy and soft, changes are browning. So what we have here is we have the ability to observe matter, which is made of molecules and empty space that are moving around at certain speeds and the wavelengths. And then they compose themselves of the composition that makes their elements and make them unique. And then that determines what their properties are. But there's something else. It's not that the properties are written inside of the hydrogen and oxygen molecules. It's that the collective consciousness that we're all part of, that we call God, determines the properties as we observe it. So in the sense, the consciousness is something that is almost separate from the mind. The mind is kind of unaware of how it is able to observe the reality around it. But the properties that we see, that's what we experience as a human soul. That's what we experience and wander around in. And I am coming from the knowledge that there is not some type of outside source or God that is sitting there and affecting the physical world from outside beyond time and space. When you talk about how Allah is outside time and beyond space, as the Quran suggests, that is suggesting that it is an immaterial energy or force. It cannot affect the physical world unless the physical world itself was made of energy and of forces. So therefore, the spiritual and the material world are actually made of the same exact things. It's just that we observe the material world as something separate for a time being, for a particular purpose. But the spiritual and the material world are actually together as one. If you see them as separate, then that's when you can experience them as separate. But when you start to see that in order for the physical matter to be arranged, and if the physical matter is also energy, that means that the force and the source of energy that arranged them must be also energy and a force. So everything beyond time and space, in this universe, in our world, in your house, in your body, is made of energy. There is nothing solid. There's no solid immaterial matter. It's all immaterial, but the material just is observed as solid for a temporary time. So let's move on. So then you get into the idea of here where it shows that matter is consists of many different states, in the sense that you have the mixtures, you have pure substances, which is the physical methods in which matter becomes known as. So you have the homogeneous mixtures, undermixtures, you have the heterogeneous mixtures, the colloids, and the composite materials. And then you get to the pure substances, which are the chemical elements and the binary compounds and the polyelemental compounds. This is what starts to compose the molecular materials within. And then you get to the types of pure chemical substances from there. So then you start to get the metallic elements. You get the simple ones, the ions and the salts. You get the alloys, you get the molecular substances, you get the polymers, you get the glasses, the minerals. So you get all of these different types of variety of different pure chemical substances. And then that comes into the hypothesized entities, which are known as the atomic ions and the molecular and complex ions. And this is why it's said that humans are composed of dirt or clay or earth in the Quran, is because we know biologically our structure is composed of the same elements that the stars and the other celestial bodies are actually made of. And it's that carbon, which is the chemical substances, the pure chemical substances that we get. So it's a mineral base. And then that is actually inside of the atomic ions and the molecular complex ions as well. So this is why Adam was described as being made of dirt, of earth. Now, you don't really see fire, but you can understand that fire can be looked at on a consciousness level of equating to something else, of being the actual spirit or spark of life that animates the body. So instead of just being a rock, then you become a moving actual soul that has its own ability to reason and to analyze its life and to observe. A rock does not have the ability to observe. A rock is composed of the same minerals as humans and the same elements as humans, but it doesn't have the ability to observe and to reason and to experience life in the way it does. So in a sense, you can think of it as this, is that we are on the higher ladder of consciousness than what simple elements would be. So you have plants, you have rocks, you have even animals. Now, animals were created for Adam as companions, and as I believe that animals are not really part of the conscious mind, but actually are part of our ability to observe reality and to learn and to grow into understanding something about ourselves. So, in a way, atoms create also the animals and the humans. But as we learn in Genesis and in the Quran, the animals were created in order for Adam to have companionship and to become a shepherd on earth, or a vicegerent, like a king on earth, in the sense that Adam is supposed to watch over those animals and to learn how to both use them and to take care of them. And in doing so, you actually grow closer to the idea of love and of kindness and of living your life with purpose, because animals sustain you in a sense. There is fuel in them, but to also learn how to respect something outside of the self. When you respect something outside of the human species, you really are growing in your awareness and understanding about the nature of love and the nature of existence and how you're interconnected with everything. So that's why the Native Americans were able to kill the buffalo, hunt the buffalo, and use all of the buffalo and almost to worship the buffalo as well. So they were able to reflect on the nature of its usage, substance of food, and then also to know that it is there for more than just food. It's there to learn from, it's there to observe, it's there to experience, it's there to expand their experiences and their understanding of the world around them. So that's why they were able to both worship the buffalo and to also use it for food. So Alan Moore says here, because our entire universe is made up of consciousness, we never really experience the universe directly. We just experience our consciousness of the universe, our perception of it. So, right, our only universe is perception. If we really get to the point of everything, really all that we are is walking vehicles for perception. That's really it. And how we perceive our reality is starting to be known in the idea that there's something called the locality and non-locality of objects that appear in front of us. So everything is moving energy and molecules and empty space and wavelengths and frequencies and vibrations. And when you look at something, it looks like it's stationary. It looks like it's right in front of you and it stays right where it is. And that is kind of the mystery that quantum physics is trying to figure out, is how is it that everything is moving, masses of energy and molecules in empty space, and when you look at something, why is it stationary? Why is it there then for you to pick up and to observe? And the only way that you can really address this is the idea of it is there for your perception to interact with it and to know it and to connect with it and to observe it and to experience it. It is solely there for your perception. And that's why there's some wisdom in the idea that everyone is a teacher and a student to you, in the sense that every soul that you interact with is there for your perception and your learning. And this is not just about you. They also are then seeing you as also a way to perceive the world, to learn, and to grow. We use each other in this universe to understand ourselves more, to expand our consciousness, and to know one another. And that's what the Quran was saying. To know one another is so important for us. Otherwise, we only know ourselves. And when you only know yourself, there's nothing. There's nothing beyond just one. So our universe is divided in many, 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 many infinite parts in order to experience those many, many, many infinite parts. So let's go on to Spinoza's God, because Spinoza actually is very close to the idea of what Allah is. And Spinoza is kind of what Einstein saw God as. And that's why I think maybe a lot of Muslims really like or respect Einstein. I know I do. And when Einstein talks about God, and he didn't believe in the religious sense of God. He was not believing in some of the more ideas of God as like an outside being. But Einstein saw God in the way that Spinoza did. And here's what Spinoza has to say. Men are mistaken in thinking themselves free. Their opinion is made up of consciousness of their own actions and ignorance of the causes by which they are determined. So it's not that he's saying that there's no such thing as free will. You do have choices to make, but you have to, on the other side, and this is where you get into the idea about ego and Satan, is the idea that on the other side of that, you have to see that also you are kind of entrapped a little bit, in the sense that if you have unaware and asleep souls on earth, and you have awakened souls, you have a mix of different levels of consciousness and experiences. Therefore, you have to know that your opinion sometimes is made up of the consciousness of your own ego, of your own actions. So what you observe is not really reality at times. And you know this because there's been times where you may have made a preconceived assumption or judgment on something, and it's not the truth. And you find that later on because you are coming from your mind that is entrapped in kind of the ego state of your self-identity. It's, you're born into a certain culture, you have a certain ethnicity, you have a certain background, your family raises you in a certain way. And so your opinions are reflected in that. Whatever made you, wherever you were born, whatever made you, your identity is kind of entrapped in that. It's hard to get to the whole collective consciousness unless you peel away those layers of ego and you actually get rid of kind of the ethnic, the culture identity, the family identity, just for a moment. You don't have to do it completely, just for a moment in time. And when you do, you connect to the collective. That's when you become brothers and sisters with Christians and Jews. That's when you become brothers and sisters with Hindus and with Sabians. That's when you become brothers and sisters with atheists. But you can respect that everybody has a different path and a different journey because the way that they were grown up in that particular environment and their particular experiences. So their perceptions of reality become different from yours. There are two types of truth, it seems. We have a universal truth that exists, that we can tap into it when we really truly want to, and that, to me, is Allah. And we have the subjective truths in which we perceive the world. We perceive the reality around us. People have made judgments and assumptions based on their own opinions, based on ego, and based on their identity. It is not the true reality. But you can get to the true reality by getting rid of the ego, or at least making it soluble in the sense that you can pass between your ego and you can pass between the unity, collective consciousness of all things in the universe. And when you are able to do that, you are then not a judgmental person, and you are constantly connecting to the truer reality of nature and existence. And this actually makes you more of a loving person, because then you're not judging people from where they're coming from. You're actually perceiving them as identical souls as you, but having different experiences and different journeys. So here we have Siri Siri, which is a beautiful quote here. The entire universe is made up of God. And for Muslims, the entire universe is made up of Allah. There is nothing outside of Allah. And we know this in the Quran. Several times it tells us over and over and over. There is no action outside of Allah that determines and allows for it to happen. And this is where it's going to get really difficult for humanity. But it's going to be a beautiful self-realization. All of the bad things that ever have happened is our fault. It is our fault. Because you have the true reality and you have the preconceived assumption, judgment by ego reality that you experience. When you are stuck in that, that's when wars, chaos, destruction happen. Because you don't see eye to eye, and there's competitiveness, there's control and domination, there's anger, and there's wrath towards one another. There's misunderstanding. You're not seeing where each other's coming from. The truer reality is that we actually all come from the same exact source of consciousness. But you cannot get to that unless you actually shed your ego first. That is the veil that is talked about in the Quran. It is the veil of the ego identity. When that veil is lifted, then you know you are part of this ultimate reality and the consciousness that is immaterial in this immaterial universe. And the way that you perceive the world around you starts to determine what kind of soul you really are. Now, I do not believe that Allah, that our collective consciousness, is wanting to experience evil and bad things and hateful things towards one another. I believe that we are on a journey to discover our innate goodness, our innate kindness, our innate generosity, and our innate love. The very act of creation is love. To expand outward and to connect to one another, to have one piece reach out to infinite many different pieces. That is love. I believe that we are going there in this human evolution and timeline, and we are at the timeline now within our consciousness of realizing it and awakening to it. I have a wonderful quote here. Sandra Cisneros said this: "The older I get, the more I'm conscious of ways very small things can make a change in the world. Tiny little things, but the world is made up of tiny matters, isn't it?" And when you get to Tesla, if you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. I'm sure, Muslims, that you have heard of the idea of making a ripple in the fabric of space and time. That's with your acts and deeds. That is why charity, kindness, compassion, all of these acts and good deeds are in the Gita, are in the Bible, are in the Torah, are in the Quran. These all are very important for us to affect the actual physical world that we observe. Remember, it's not really physical, it's energy. So when you put your thoughts and your deeds, that's energy. You're actually creating ripples in fabric of time and space. You are actually changing the reality around you by creating that good act and that deed. That is where we are going. Our collective consciousness, Allah, wants every single soul to create only goodness and light and kindness and compassion. Those souls that refuse and deny it will not rejoin with the all. They will experience their isolation, and that is hell. They will experience their isolation, and hell is actually being stuck in the ego for however many times or eons that it takes for them to have a self-realization, as many of you are having now and as I am having. The self-realization in the awareness that we are all connected to each other. There should be no reason to harm one another. There is only the ability to connect, to love, and to experience. This is joy. This is bliss. This is what you can have on earth when you actually strip away the hellish layers of ego. When you strip away Satan, when you cast him out of your heart, as the Christians like to talk about, you are opening yourself up to experiencing another reality in the sense that it's the immaterial spiritual world that you are connecting to. And remember, once again, this universe is immaterial. It's just that you perceive it as material. Humans perceive dualistic nature because it's a bit of a journey. It's a bit of a journey. It's a game. It's a story. It's something that we wish to experience. It's a mystery to discover. It's something fun to unravel. Without it, there'd be nothing. Learn to enjoy the experience and the mystery. Learn to enjoy the awakening that's going on around you and within you.